Okay, today I'm going to do another gouache tutorial with a thick and thin scale. I've been trying to do a few of these um, beginner gouache painting tutorials because I think that there are some really good skills to gain as you are starting your gouache journey. And I am currently starting my video tutorial journey. I want to get better at this skill, at this art form, and so I've been practicing and putting a lot of things together. So let's kind of practice something new together right now. I've got all my stuff ready. I've had a couple of videos that just aren't quite working the way I want them to. So today I've got my emotional support banana slug and this cute little, I don't know, tiny desk flower thing that my friend Angie gave me with a little skull in there. So good luck right there. And I've also got all of my gouache. So I think this is the full palette of the Arteza Blossomy collection, which I have really enjoyed using. This has been my favorite color palette to use for the last couple of years. And I recently realized that I think this palette in gouache specifically is discontinued, which is a huge bummer. So I'm waiting for an order to come through from eBay, and that will probably be the last time that I get to use this colors unless I find another source for them. So we're gonna make the most of it. I really like the pastels in here. The only thing that's kind of a problem with this set is that there's not a lot of contrast. Everything is in a pastel range, and so I usually add this really dark purple. This one's from Art Advantage, so that I can have something that's a high contrast, a darker contrast to the lighter tones that are in all the other colors. So we're going to be using these today. The other thing that I am using is an EPO paper pad, and I like these because they are all plastic sheets of paper that are usually used for things like alcohol inks. But I like these because they can come in a little size that I can give students just one of these sheets to use as a palette. We can put our paints directly on here, can paint off of it. The paint dries. We can reactivate it with water because we're using water-based gouache. And then when students are done with it, or when I'm done with my palette, I can just put this in the sink and soak it and wash it all off and then use it again. So this is a really handy tool, especially if you're teaching lots of classes or you're kind of working with lots of different palettes. It's nice to have a few of these around so that you can test colors, and then also just like kind of keep it in your sketchbook. Like if I have several colors that I like using, I can put them all onto this EPO paper and then toss it into my sketchbook and bring it around with me if I want to paint on the go. So that's a really cool thing. The other tools that I have with me are my full set of paintbrushes. I'll probably only use some of the smaller brushes. Like I know I'll probably want to use this liner if I get to do any doodling. The small round brush in this set is really handy, and then like the small flat angle brush is one that I typically use. And then I also have a watercolor pencil. It's just an Artist Loft Michaels brand watercolor pencil that is good for sketching. When I'm using watercolor paints or watercolor based gouache, I like to use a watercolor pencil because if I'm making sketches and I need to fix something or something's not working, and I don't have to use an eraser to get rid of the sketch marks, I can just use a little bit of water, and that way I can kind of preserve the tooth of the paper a little bit better than rubbing it out or burnishing it with an eraser. So those are my special tools. And then I always use my 2 cups of water. One of these will be the dirty water, one of these will be the clean water, and that's so that we can wash our brushes off in the dirty water and then use clean water to add water to our paints, which is going to be the whole idea for today: how much water to add to paints, what to do with different levels of paint, how to think about thick and thin paint. And so having your clean water jar nearby is super helpful. Speaking of water, one super handy thing is this little spray bottle that I got probably with like a travel kit, like a travel shampoo kit or something. And I always have a little bit of artist tape kind of wrapped around it in case I want to throw this in my bag and do a little bit of plein air painting, or just to have something that's a really useful tool in my kit when I wander around and try to do art and things like that. So this is here in case my paints dry on the palette. I can spritz it down and then re-wet them and continue to use them. And then lastly, one of the most important tools that I like to use is a paper towel for blotting and drying my brush. because it's all about water control, having a way to really dry off your brush so that you can control how much water is in the bristles of your brush is super duper important. And a paper towel is really great for that. I keep rags around for other things, but rags for painting is a little bit problematic because sometimes lint or cat hair or just dust or anything like that can be trapped in the little fibers on the towel, and then that can end up in my painting. So with the paper towel, it's less likely to be a problem because it doesn't have any lint on it. You can still like kind of get dust on things and everything, but it's a lot less likely with the paper towel. Okay, so we'll start off by adding some pigment to some paints to our EPO paper. I think I'm gonna do pastel ice mint for this one today, just because I think that this is a fun color and I haven't used it a ton yet. Some of these colors I've loved using quite a lot and they're running out. So I want to be a little bit more precious with them. But this one, I think it's a pretty color. I really like the mint color, but I haven't used a ton of it. So there's a lot left in this tube. Usually with tubes that have been sitting around for a while, I want to give them just like a little bit of a squeeze. If there's some air in the tube, you can also give it a shake. We're just going to give this one a little squeeze. And then get some paint out onto the palette. Okay, we're ready to go. I usually like to start off by sketching in where I'll paint my scale. And the scale that we're making today is a thick to thin scale. So we're going to paint different levels of watercolor gouache onto our papers, varying how much water is with the paint. So we're going to have really thick paint and then we're going to have really thin paint. And we'll talk about that. So here's my scale. I've got a 5-part scale here. And we're going to go from thick to thin. Start off with my angled brush, and I like to clean my brushes off really quickly before I start painting with them because sometimes there's just a little bit of dust or paint from the last time I painted with them left on the brushes, and I want to make sure I know what I'm working with. So a clean brush is a good place to start. And also having a damp brush kind of makes it easier to pick up the paint. So the paint that's currently on my palette is straight out of the tube. We just opened up this tube and squirted it right onto the palette, and so this is literally straight out of the tube. I'm not going to add any water to it. My brush isn't really damp at all. Like it's gotten a little bit wet just to clean it off, but it's pretty dry right now. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this paint and paint it right into that very first square on the left. It's super thick paint because it's straight out of the tube. It's the thickest we can get. I'm trying to fill this in, but you can kind of see I'm having a little bit of trouble getting smoother lines because the paint is so thick. I'm getting a little bit of this dry brush effect, especially on the edges right here. Kind of see a little bit of the paper peeking through on the edges. The body of this paint right now, because it's so thick, I can really see those brush strokes, the bristles of the brush. I can kind of see all those shapes and those swirls. And it's coming down. I mean, it's pretty chunky. It's not very smooth, but it is pretty even. It's all really thick, and that means like the paint isn't really moving. It's not pooling in any place. It's just going where I put it. So that is our first level of thickness straight out of the tube. And I usually call this one, I'll label these, and I call this one SOT for straight out of tube. Okay, so as we get thinner, we're going to add more water to our paint. So we've got the thickest we can have possible. Just dipping my brush into the water and bringing it over to the palette to add a little bit of water to what I have on my palette. But it's not so drippy that it's like running down on the EPO paper. It's still really, really thick, but it's not as sticky as straight out of the tube was. So we've added a little bit of water here. And I like to think of this as maybe the texture of melted butter. So Think about it that way. I'm working it into the brush. Now we can paint it onto our scale. And see, it goes down much smoother. I'm not getting any of that dry brush happening. It's going down much smoother, but I can still see some of the paint strokes, some of the brush strokes in the paint. So it's still high body, thick body paint. So something you might notice with this level of paint is that you can have some areas that are really thick and some areas that are a little bit thinner in paint. There's less paint there and it doesn't move around. Like the paint isn't kind of moving into different areas. It's staying put. And so this is our second thickness on the scale. And we'll call this one butter for that melted butter texture. Okay, we're going to repeat the process. So just a little bit of water on the brush. I'm not cleaning the brush off. I'm just picking up some water with the brush, adding it to the paint on the palette. And now we're getting a little bit looser. We can start seeing that paint move around a little bit more. You get even just a little bit more. Oh, now you can really see like the paint's, it could be kind of drippy if I let it hang here for a little bit. That paint feels like it might drip any second. It's a really good texture. Kind of reminds me of cream, heavy cream, something thicker but very liquidy. And this time, we're still seeing some of the brush strokes, but we're not seeing the texture of the brush strokes so much as we're seeing the paint kind of move around where the brush is laying it down. It's going down really loose. There's certainly no dry brush. We've got more water in here. And we're seeing less and less of like the texture of the paintbrush, the bristles, right? So we can see here, still see like one brush stroke there, but this one, it's sort of evening out. And this one we'll call cream to make us think of maybe the texture of heavy cream. Next on the scale, a little bit more water. And now we're getting into definitely drippy territory. Maybe even a little bit more than that. Whoa, there we go. So now I'm looking for the texture of maybe milk, if you're a milk drinker, or soy milk. Something that's a little bit creamier, but definitely very, very liquidy. Pretty watery right there. We'll paint this down, and this time we're really seeing that paint pool in places. Usually where I pick up my brush, there's a little extra dab of paint there. Do a couple layers of this. Okay, so here we have maybe the texture of milk. All those brush strokes, just sort of, they melt away. They really flatten out. And you can see the paint pooling, but it's a little bit easier to get an even coat of paint in there. You can see it kind of moving around a little bit there. But when it dries, it'll dry really flat. And this one we'll call milk. Okay, the very last thinness on our scale is going to be the most water of the scale. So I'm going to pick up quite a bit of water and really just get into like just a little bit of pigment. It's mostly water. It's very watercolory. It should remind you of using translucent watercolors. This is a little bit of a wash level here. You can see a little bit of pigment, but it's mostly water. And if I pick it up and show you the shininess, you can see all that water on the paper with very, very, very light pigment. So it reminds me of something like maybe green tea, a really light tea. Okay. And so what we have here is our scale of thick paint to thin paint. Some of the things to notice about it is that the thicker the paint, the more opaque. The thinner the paint, the more transparent. It's one of my favorite aspects of gouache that you can get opaque layers you can layer on top of each other, like put down more and more paint and continue to layer. Because of its opacity, it has a mattifier, and something that gives it a little bit more body in the paint, and so you can do that layering. But then if you want, you can also use the watercolor aspect of it. It's such a versatile medium, and you can get these really transparent watercolor like pastels. So this is our scale that's going to help us do all sorts of things with illustration, with painting. We're going to do a kind of a sketchbook little doodle down here after we let this dry. I'm starting off with a really quick sketch with my watercolor pencil of these two slugs in a reference that I found that I just thought were really adorable. And with the watercolor pencil, I'm drawing really lightly, and I'm not too worried about details or anything like that because it'll wash out and blend in with the gouache as I paint. My first layer of painting is going to be my thinnest layer of painting, so it's the tea level paint that we mixed up for the scale just now. And I'm just using it to wash over the illustration as well as around it, just to soften everything up and maybe even figure out where some of the shadows on the slugs are. And it's really, really quick, really light. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity to show how I use the EPO paper. So I can just wipe off all of that super watery paint and clean up some space for more painting. And that's what's great about EPO paper. You can just wipe it away. So the first color that I'm working with here is going to be Lollipop Pink from this Arteza set. And I'm using pinks first as my underpainting so that I can keep the color of the slugs a bit warmer. I think it's a good contrast with the ice mint wash that I started off with. And in the reference, they're pretty warm. They have lots of reds and oranges in the shadows. And so I just thought that that makes them feel a little bit more friendly, a little bit more fun. And I'm using a milk level of paint for this Lollipop Pink. And then I'm going over it with milk level Petal Pink. The Lollipop Pink is a little bit more blue and the Petal Pink is a little bit brighter. And I wanted something in between them. So to blend, I'm actually blending directly on the paper. I don't mix the paints as much on my palette, but I let the blending happen on the paper itself. Because if I use equal levels of thickness for paint, then they can blend directly onto the paper and mix a little bit more. My next layer is still underpainting. This is the peach color from this set, and I think it just gets it a little bit closer to that warm orange, warm yellow color of the references of the slugs. And so I'm going over this. It's a little bit thicker now. It's probably like a milky cream. So it's kind of sitting on top. It's still blending a little bit. It's still picking up some of that pink underneath, but the peach is definitely, you know, more brighter and sitting on top of all the other paint. And this just kind of helps set the tone even more for the next level, which is going to be my favorite color of this whole palette is this cheese puff. I don't know if I love the color so much as I love that it's called cheese puffs, and that's a fantastic name for a paint. It's perfect for this paint because it's this orangey yellow. And this level of paint is really thick. I'd say this is more between cream and butter now, so we're getting thicker and thicker with each level of paint. And I'm using this all over both of the slugs. I'm leaving a little bit of the top parts of the slugs unpainted in this color so that I can use the lighter yellow and a little bit of white to make them seem a bit shinier up there. So this is, I think this is like lemon yellow from the Arteza set. And I'm just using it to model out some of the shape of the slugs and make it seem like light is shining down on them. I'm adding a little bit of Caran-00 white, just really kind of plain white to this paint so that it brightens up a little bit more. Because this paint is all of the paint from this palette is all pastels. They really don't have a lot of contrast in tone, especially. So the white helps brighten up some of the areas, especially the little baby slug was a really delicate pastel yellow, and I wanted it to seem really lighter and shinier. And then the top of the larger slug was really shiny because, of course, slugs sparkle. So I wanted to make sure that we got some white on there to sparkle. And I went back in a little bit more with some of the ice mint and then added a little bit of purple. I think this is like pastel lilac to work up some of the shadow. I'm going to do a little bit more later to deepen the shadows on here. But this is a lighter level of paint, so I used that cream butter for the orange for the cheese puff, and I'm using thinner paint, probably like cream or milk, for these extra color highlights so they blend with that cheese puff instead of covering over it. So that's how I get these really gentle gradients with this paint. So it makes it seem like the shadows are a little bit gentler. And so this is the first stage of a finished painting. It looks pretty good, but I want to do more with it. So I break out the purples, and so that's, I think, lavender, pastel lavender maybe, with from the Arteza set, and then a dark purple from Art Creations. And I'm using my liner brush, which I am teaching myself to use and to love. It's a little bit tricky, but I think what it does for my paintings, turning them more into illustrations, is really gratifying. So I get to define the lines around the slugs. I get to give them a little bit more character, and I really, really like that. I'm going around with the liner brush, and the level of paint here is as thick as I can get it while also being able to paint with it. If it's too thick, if it's too dry, it won't come off the liner brush very well. But if it's too wet, then it won't hold that sharp line as well. So it takes a little bit of time getting used to. After I've painted that line in with the liner brush, I go in with a small round brush, and I'm just sort of blending up the purple back into the orange. And I think that this is just another way to create shadow and to create a little bit of contrast around the slugs. It softens it a little bit more, kind of makes it feel more natural, even though we're using these funky colors. And then this is like my favorite part of this whole painting, is I'm going to use that purple from Art Creations with the liner brush, get it as thick as I can where it can still paint thin lines, but it'll stand out really brightly against the orange and all the other pastels. And like, this is where magic happens to me. This is where these become not just paintings of slugs, but they become little characters themselves. And so adding these small details like the little folds over the eyes and just the crinkles around the foot and things like that, this makes these come alive for me. And so I'm just using the very tip of the brush to get these really fine details, just like the little laciness, you know, the way that the foot kind of crinkles. That's just totally my favorite thing. It definitely turns it from something that feels more natural to something that feels a little bit more graphic, but I mean, I'm here for it. And then I'm going to repeat the same process where I'm dropping in color. It's a little bit wetter, it's a little bit thin, but it's still pretty thick because it's sitting on top of the orange. And now I'm taking a mostly dry brush with no color at all on it to blend up the wet paint, and that blending reactivates the orange paint just a little bit more so that we can get these soft gradations of shadows. And like, honestly, I think that this modeling around the slug just makes it happen for me. So I'm really happy that I did this. I know it's a little bit goofy looking, but I'm pretty pleased with it. And if you are into this more natural, albeit funny color image, then maybe stop right here because it's going to get a little bit weird. Off camera, I decided that I wanted to add more to these slugs. So I added butterfly wings and I added little horns. Little baby slug has these teeny tiny horns around it that I just like hilariously cute to me. And I added some shadows using a glazing technique with tea-level purple paint over the orange. You can kind of see it underneath the wings and underneath the horns. And I do this because I think it's fun. They kind of look like little slug fairies to me. And I'm trying to take my illustrations to be more inventive and more creative, because usually when I paint from references, I just paint exactly what I see. And so I think that they could be a little bit more fun. And so I'm just finishing up this painting with a color wheel using all of the colors that I used in the painting. And that's the finish for me. If you enjoyed this, if you enjoy gouache, please pick some up, maybe share with me what you make. I'd love to see it. I love looking at people's paintings. If you do goofy, cute little things like this, I would be thrilled. I've been practicing a lot, so there's this one that I'm super happy with. I have some other illustrations in my sketchbook right now that I've been trying out different things with, different, styles. I love the frog too. Anyway, thanks for watching.